Welcome. My name is John O'Sullivan. I'm the president of the Institute, and our guest today is a distinguished American lawyer and politician. Jeff Sessions has had both a legal and political career of great success in Alabama, his home state, and nationally. You, Jeff, have been a federal prosecutor, Alabama's Attorney General, of course, also United States Attorney General, and you've been a four-term U.S. Senator. And you were the first U.S. Senator, I believe, to endorse Donald Trump for the presidency. You played a major part in his election campaign. You were appointed Attorney General by Donald Trump in 2017, but you subsequently recused yourself as Attorney General from the investigation into the allegations of a Russia-Trump collusion. And although I think people would say, particularly those who follow your views and activities on immigration, you served with distinction as Attorney General, Donald Trump, after 2 years, asked for your resignation. You are now running to recapture your Alabama seat this fall. You still support Donald Trump, but he's apparently backing another Republican in the election, which makes this Alabama election one of the most interesting in the United States. Now, my first question is a very straightforward one. You have had several successful careers, and you could, if you had wished, lived a very pleasant and agreeable life in your home state. What on earth persuaded you to go into politics?
Well, there are some things that I worked on for 20 years in the Senate that I believed deeply in and believed that I had particular insight in and certain experiences that would make me particularly effective in that. For example, I do believe that it's time for the United States to be less ideological about free trade and be more practical, and to analyze that foreign countries, maybe particularly China, have manipulated trade rules to take advantage of us, shuttering factories in America, achieving a monumental trade surplus with the United States, which they are indeed now using to advance their military agenda. I believe that illegal immigration needed to end, could end, and we needed to do that. We admit 1.1 million people every year to permanent legal residence. We do very little focus on their skills and very little interest in what is best for America. And now we have this massive illegality that I have found myself involved in for a number of years, probably the most prominent senator in Washington on this issue for well over a decade. And I do think that the United States needs to be more thoughtful about its foreign policy, where we can't remake entire countries overnight, try to make them democracies when they have no heritage of that, and be more thoughtful and realistic in our foreign policy. So those are just some of the things I feel deeply about. I believe that at this point in time I could contribute to that and would be honored to have that opportunity. I supported President Trump, John, because he was advocating those things. I had been advocating them before. I thought the American people were angry that they wanted the illegality at the border ended, and the Congress and the president never did. They believed that we were unfairly traded against by many trading nations, and nothing was being done about it. They thought we had involved ourselves too extensively in democratic remaking of countries that weren't ready for it, and those sort of things. So those are the things that I think Trump ran on, and I supported him early and continue to support and continue to be impressed that he is advancing steadily.
Thank you, and we'll go over all of those issues perhaps in a minute or two, but let me just first focus on the one that you first focused on immigration. I think it is true that when you came to Washington, there were very few people on the Republican side, I should say, of the Senate who took up the cause of immigration control at all seriously. You were the first one to do so. I think you personally stopped two major immigration bills which would have increased immigration. What interests me here is not only why you took it up, but why so many Republicans did not, and why even in the 2016 presidential election, almost all of the other candidates, indeed all of them except President Trump, resolutely refused to say anything serious about immigration control. Why did they not want to deal with it?
John, there's a lot of reasons. For some, I think it's a financial pressure and strength of many in the financial community and the global community that pushed to not contain illegal immigration. There's no doubt if you bring in sufficient numbers of persons, we think there may be 11 million illegal immigrants in America today that came unlawfully. So that number provides a pool of workers that'll work for less, that can be terminated easily, and who otherwise don't have to have the kind of health care and retirement benefits that American workers would have. So they've liked that. I'm not seeing a business person yet that didn't like more cheap labor. That's their interest. Enhances their profit. So I think that was part of it. Secondly, many of the Republicans have bought into a rather excessive libertarianism, that borders don't matter. Global people should be able to move not only within the United States, but globally at any moment. That if a person wants to work in Mexico and a business wants to hire them in the United States, what does the government have to say about it? But I came to believe that's a very wrong approach, that a nation has to maintain stability. It has to be aware that excessive flows of immigration depresses working Americans, dropping them out of the middle class into the lower middle class or even unemployed. And I studied the bills in the Judiciary Committee, of which I was a member and have been for many years. That committee allowed me to understand the loopholes in the bill. It would have given lawful residence to the 11 million people basically, and promised enforcement in the future. But the truth was, when the bill was examined, the enforcement would not occur. And so we would be providing an amnesty for everybody illegally and no end to the illegal flow in the future, perhaps even enhancing it, because the next group could expect amnesty too.
You know, I think that's very persuasive. What interests me is, was it that kind of argument that persuaded Donald Trump? Because in the campaign of 2016, he made this the center of his campaign. I wonder whether, in a sense, the issue discovered him or he discovered the issue. I mean, he came out and said several things about immigration. Was he then surprised by the warm response he got, or had he war-gamed this all the way through long before he entered the race?
I think Donald Trump has certain beliefs. I think he believed that our immigration policy should be lawful, and I believe he thought and believed that it should serve the national interest. That is, instead of having what we call chain migration or family-connected migration, regardless of the skills or educational level of people who want to come, he felt, as I did, and I think most Americans, that we should have a skill-based system, much like the Canadians do, and I think Britain does to a more extent than we do. So those were some of the things. He does believe that we should bring in foreign workers, and so there's always a dispute about how many. One thing I know, John, just recently I've called for, and the president has said, that when we have this massive unemployment as a result of the pandemic, and we are losing jobs every single day, we have no jobs. We don't have jobs for people to come to take in the country.
Yeah.
We have massive unemployment, unlike we've ever seen before. So I do think that we've got to be realistic about bringing in foreign workers and make sure that we're not bringing 1.4 million that come for work-related visas. That 1.4 million needs to be dropped substantially in the light of the unemployment disaster we now have.
Jeff, once President Trump had been nominated, you joined his campaign very strongly. You were in the middle of it. Two questions. Did anything happen in that campaign that gave you even more conviction or maybe worried you about the future Trump presidency? But secondly, most people were surprised when he won. Were you surprised?
Well, I'm never overconfident, so I worried to the last moment. But I remember telling him as the campaign went on several times on the campaign plane and when we had a relaxed chat, Hillary Clinton cannot match this. She cannot match the drive, the will, the determination that Donald Trump displayed daily in these huge rallies all over the country. So I called it a movement. To me, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. He was attracting independents and moderates, people who dropped out totally of the process, who felt in him and saw in him hope for progress. And they liked his strength, his willingness to challenge the establishment, stand up against political correctness, to articulate making America great, and advocating that we should take American interest first and defend our interest, our workers' jobs against unfair competition. But I wasn't overconfident about it. The only thing and my confidence in his belief system increased because he was from New York. He'd now have no real record before. And there was concern when I endorsed him that maybe he would not be true to the promises he made in the campaign. Many people said that to me. How do you know he's going to do what he promised? But he's been doing that to a degree few presidents have achieved. That's one of the things that's most popular about him. He's fulfilling the promises he made.
I think that is certainly the view of most conservatives. I think it's probably also the regretful view of some Democrats as well. But let me now turn to the problems that arose in office. Obviously, you were appointed by a grateful Trump. You were appointed Attorney General, but almost immediately you were attacked as having had illegitimate conversations with the Russian ambassador, and that you then had to fight those allegations, and as a result, you recused yourself from. Now, what was the basis of the allegations, and why did you decide to recuse yourself?
Well, the recusal was pretty fundamental. There was a post-Watergate, post-Nixon law and regulation that explicitly said if you participated in a campaign, you could not, in the Department of Justice, investigate that campaign, which is pretty simple and traditional in every prosecutor's office, I guess, in the Western world. So I could not participate in that from that reason. Secondly, I was attacked as having improper communications with the Russian ambassador, which was basically nothing. And I had absolutely no improper discussions with him. I met with lots of ambassadors and I met with him on occasion, but nothing about collusion or any impropriety. And thirdly, I was a witness to some of the things that would happen. I chaired the National Security Committee for the campaign. That was where some of the issues arose from. And so for several different reasons, it was clear to me I could not investigate myself in my campaign. That's basic principle. Secondly, it was explicit law. And so that's why I recused myself. The president, this was so frustrating for him. It was in the newspaper every day. There were leaks every day. They leaked against me and they leaked against the president and all of his team fundamentally. And there were false charges continually. To say it was frustrating for the president is an understatement of significance. And he was not happy with me and for not somehow supervising that investigation. But I was determined to bring an end to the politics in the Department of Justice, to bring an end to the leaking in the Department of Justice, to restore discipline, regular order, proper management. And I knew I could not do that if I myself, on the first few days of my tenure, rejected a clear mandate of law. So that's how that happened.
I think it's worth saying that no one now believes there was anything whatsoever in the allegations that forced you to recuse yourself. Now, but what do you think would have happened, by the way, putting on your fortune teller's hat, what do you think would have happened if you hadn't recused yourself?
I won't speculate in detail, but in my opinion, I think most people would recognize it would not have worked. It could not have been sustained. I would have been hauled before Congress immediately. Republicans would not have supported me because I would be in violation of plain law. I could not defend myself effectively with integrity. It would have made things look like a cover-up, some sort of effort to deny the truth from coming out. I was confident, and I had seen absolutely nothing improper in the campaign. As it turned out, I will just say it this way. That group, the Mueller team that conducted the investigation, the special counsel, I believe was in fact composed of persons who are not unbiased. Many of them had strong Democrat connections, were hostile to the president. They turned over every rock multiple times. They stretched their mandate as far as it possibly could be, and maybe too far. But in the end, they exonerated the president. They found there had been no collusion, and that is going to be a major advantage for his reelection campaign, that even a hostile investigative team has found him innocent of those persistent charges that were in the national news media every day for months and months and months.
In fact, it's not an exaggeration to say, is it, that what was a charge of conspiracy against President Trump has been transformed into a conspiracy against President Trump, a conspiracy which seems to include the heads of the 3 intelligence agencies and national security agencies in the United States, and a lot of other influential people, including the media. So one wants to, you mentioned about Robert Mueller. Let me ask you about 2 other people. The most important one is, of course, President Obama. Lately, his name has come into this as having initiated in the White House a kind of investigation into the behavior of the Trump campaign, something which is definitely barred in American law. How do you think, what do you think the role of the president might have been? And let me put it this way, if it seems to be a serious accusation against him, how on earth does the Justice Department handle such a difficult question?
Well, Attorney General Barr had served as Attorney General for 2 years previously. He's had experience in the intelligence community. He was a chief counsel for a great corporation, I believe Verizon. So he's able to handle that with judgment and integrity. He loves the Department of Justice. He knows it. He knows its rules. Secondly, what happened was that there were intercepts of foreign persons, and those foreign persons, most prominent, Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, those intercepts picked up conversations with General Flynn. So that can be obtained by certain high-level officials in the department, in the government. It looks like as many as 38 persons, including the UN ambassador in Italy. Normally, I don't see how they had any interest in that. But the president, President Obama, obviously knew about that. He discussed it with Director of the FBI, James Comey, and the Deputy Attorney General of the United States at the time, Sally Yates. Shortly before he left office, he expressed an interest in Flynn. He had made a couple of suggestions or gave advice to President-elect Trump on only about one or two issues. And one of those was, do not hire General Flynn. So he clearly had a bias, it seems, against General Flynn, who had been the three-star general that headed the Defense Department's intelligence agency, Defense Intelligence Agency. So that's that. And so he told Comey and the Department of Justice about this. Apparently, the investigation of Flynn was being closed. They kept it open. They ran in agents against the normal policies of investigating a high government official within just a day or two of the president being elected and General Flynn coming on board. He was sort of ambushed. I think it's fair to say he was set up. They had this transcript of the Kislyak interview. They asked him about it. At least several agents did not think he lied about the nature of that interview. Some thought otherwise, apparently, and he ended up being forced to plead guilty to that. That's now being reviewed. But so it's not illegal for the President of the United States and Vice President Biden, who also shortly before he left office got the same intercept and unmasked General Flynn's name. But the crime would be who leaked it. It was, in fact, top secret. It was leaked to the media, and it caused a huge controversy of monumental proportions, and that would be a crime.
Well, in fact, the controversy of these proportions is in fact rumbling on still. We don't know how it's going to end up. But it does seem to me, I must ask you as both a lawyer and a politician, in the event that senior figures from the past administration have been involved in these crimes, doesn't this present the present or any future administration with a tremendous difficulty, which is, on the one hand, you have a lot of people in America who say we're fed up with the law that's being applied to us but isn't applied to them. People commit crimes and they get off scot-free, others go to prison. And on the one hand, you have that consideration, and on the other, of course, you have the great delicacy of an administration investigating the actions of another administration, particularly if those actions are likely to lead to criminal charges.
That is correct. I think it's a delicate situation. That's why we're fortunate to have someone of the experience and judgment that Attorney General Barr in handling it. We also have removed former FBI Director James Comey, who, in my opinion, lacked judgment, was grandiose in his visions. He was not disciplined. He leaked regularly, and he had a political agenda. That's not true today. So it's important that we get to the bottom of this. John, this is my view of it. I remember as a young law student being supportive of Nixon, and the Watergate all happened. The main lesson out of Watergate was that no chief executive, no president can use the CIA, the Internal Revenue Service, or the FBI to advance their political agenda or to focus on and attack their political enemies. This has to be examined. So we've had the clearing of President Trump, his exoneration. Now Attorney General Barr is taking action to determine whether or not the investigators acted objectively and with a legal basis for what they did, or did they act politically and improperly. He's got a great prosecutor that's heading that. They're going to proceed with it, I think, fully and completely. I do not believe that it's justifiable for this matter to be concluded until the American people know not only that President Trump did not collude with the Russians, but also know how the investigation was occurred, and what wrongdoings may have occurred in the process of it. And if people violated the law, they would expect them to be prosecuted in the course of this. I think that's where we are. Nothing can be hidden. I believe it's time for the FBI and the Department of Justice just to be open. If errors were occurred or crimes were committed, they have to be uncovered and prosecuted or discipline taken. And only then can it rebuild itself with the kind of integrity and public confidence that they must have to be effective in defending America.
Senator, about 3 months ago, it seemed that you have just said that we knew the broad outlines of the injustices that had occurred against President Trump and the need, and we had some glimpse anyway of how the whole scandal had become turned around and was going to be dealt with. You also had a very strong economy, and it looked to most people that President Trump was going to do very well, certainly win, probably win handsomely. And then, of course, the coronavirus epidemic struck the world and struck the United States. And in doing so, it completely threw open, it seems to me, the political prospects for 2020. So my first question is, obviously, it matters how the different parties and the different people are handling this. So how well, in your view, is the president handling the coronavirus epidemic? A kind of political analysis, if you would. How well are the Democrats handling it? And how well are America's governors handling it? Because they, after all, are using some unusual powers. Are they going beyond the powers that the Constitution gives them?
Good. Those are three pretty big questions. So you may have to remind me of it. I'll start out with the political realm. Look, we had the strongest economy maybe in the history of the Republic in December and January, early January. This pandemic has been very, very damaging. We hope and think the economy will bounce back rapidly. The stock market is doing well. And so the financial markets seem to believe the economy will bounce back more strongly than a lot of Americans may think at this moment. And hopefully they're right. The market jumped 3.5% yesterday on the discovery of the potential for a new vaccine. So where does that leave the president? It was dropped in his lap. I do not believe the people of the United States blame him. It started in China. They covered it up. The World Health Organization falsely told the world it was not contagious. They even attacked President Trump when he blocked travel from China to the United States when they were saying it was not contagious and that was the wrong thing to do. But he did it and helped protect us to some degree. I don't believe a sustained charge can be made that the president is failing. I just noticed on a per capita basis, the Democrats are saying how many Americans have died and how many Americans are infected. But on a per capita basis, there are at least 9 European countries with a higher death rate per capita than the United States. What I would say that really means is this is an unbelievably difficult thing. We didn't know how to fight this virus. It was totally on top of us. China covered it up. It allowed it to spread too much. They didn't give us the information that would help us make a vaccine sooner or treat it sooner. And now the whole world is suffering to an extraordinary degree. And I believe the Democrats who are blaming President Trump for failure are going to have to answer why other great developed progressive scientific nations are having just as much problems or more than the United States is having. Also, former Vice President Joe Biden is 77. He's not performing well. He's won the Democratic nomination. It appears he will go to the convention with more than enough votes to be nominated as their nominee. Some think he could be denied it in some fashion, but it won't be easy. The prospects are he will be that nominee. And when President Trump and he go head to head, that's going to be just like last time when I told President Trump she can't match this. I'll just say this: Joe Biden will not match Donald Trump on the campaign trail. The man has got a strength and a vigor and ability to communicate this extraordinary. And people want things to get done. They don't want business as usual. So I think his message, my political judgment is you have to ask yourself what it's going to be like in October when that election is under full way. Both sides are running television ads. They're debating and campaigning. How's it going to look? And I think it's going to look good for President Trump. And I think he'll be reelected. But there are places in the world, it used to be in London, where you could go and bet on those things. So people think they're so confident there are places they can put their money down, and let's see what happens.
Indeed. And I didn't get much out of my Reagan bet because someone in 1980 thought that I was mad and didn't place it. But there we are. Let me turn to the governors and make a point about the different way in which America has handled the coronavirus epidemic compared to other countries. I'd say two ways. One is that it's actually appealed much more than the other countries to the role of the private sector. And I think it's had a strong response. The private sector has again and again volunteered to try to provide the government and the people what they need in terms of ventilators or vaccines and so on. That's very encouraging. I think we see it, by the way, to a degree in Britain too. But in general, most of the governments are trying to monopolize this question. And the second is the role of the fact that you have a federal system. And it seems to me that, you can comment on this perhaps, that President Trump has relied on the federal concept of federalism much more. He's been prepared to cooperate with the governors and has cooperated with them. And the governors have been encouraged to decide a lot of questions themselves and provide a lot of the answers. Would you say that that's either true or false? And secondly, have the governors taken this encouragement maybe a little too far? Because some of the measures that they've taken seem to me to go beyond the powers that the Constitution gives them.
John, that's a good question. First, I would say the president's handled this well in that regard. States in the United States are sovereign. The federal government is sovereign. Cities and counties are creatures of the state, and they're subject to control by the states. So the president has decided not to federalize this matter, but to allow the sovereign states to manage their own agenda. He's given strong advice. He's met regularly with his experts and the public every day for a while. For weeks, he answered every question that was raised on a daily basis with his experts, healthcare experts. So I think that was a good choice. Look at Alabama, even in your wonderful wife Melissa's home in North Alabama, where Huntsville, one of the great international cities in America, the highest technology centers in America with a lot of travel, only has 4 deaths. My home in Mobile, where we have Mardi Gras like New Orleans, has got 70 or 80 deaths. So even within a state, there are differences. And then within the nation, New York is by far the highest death rates and infection rates, whereas the Midwest and other areas are very low. So each state is developing its own policies. We just hope that we're doing it the right way. American people are ready to get opening again, get back to work, get the economy moving. But I think people are going to be very cautious. I hope so, that they'll just be very careful when they go to the grocery store, go to their workplace, to take those extra precautions that I'm hearing are happening. People are doing that. And certainly the spread of this virus would be less than it was at the beginning when people did not realize its danger or how contagious it was. Overreaching. Yeah. The Constitution, for example, in our First Amendment to the Constitution, says you have a right to assemble in America. That's being denied. You have a right to freely exercise your religion, your faith. Well, you can't go to church and haven't been in many, many states. But we do have laws and histories that define those rights, subject to a public health pandemic like this. And we've got statutes and we've got traditions in law that can be done, but it has to be for a limited period of time, and it has to be justified by science. And so I think as time goes on, it's going to be harder for people to say you cannot go to church, you can't have a political protest, you can't go even to a sporting event. At some point that may be rising up, and we've not faced it precisely like this before, but I do believe there'll be more complaints about violating the Constitution, as you suggested.
Thank you. I'd like to move quickly to the question of the kind of impact the epidemic is going to have on some of the nation's policies. Obviously, one of them is immigration. Are we going to change some of the immigration laws in such a way as to safeguard ourselves more against this kind of thing, or not?
Yes, perhaps. I believe that I could contribute in the Senate to actually drafting laws that would close too many loopholes that have made the laws almost unenforceable. You have hundreds of pages of the Immigration and Nationality Act, but there are these loopholes that make the whole thing almost worthless. If you don't, the whole intent of the legislation is being eroded because of just a few court rulings and loopholes. So we need to fix that, and it's been a long part of our heritage that you can bar people from entry to the United States if they propose a health risk. There's never been a doubt about that in America. People have had to prove that they're not diseased, contagious when they come in. So I think that's already pretty clearly established. Also, I think, though, intellectually, it has educated people to the fact that borders mean something. Nations have borders.
That's right.
Fact. And now I think it provides an opportunity for people to say, who are these people that want to erase borders, that just want no open borders, and that we can defend our country against massive immigration, legal or illegal? So I think that is going to be a clarifying thing to help the American people and maybe even Congress to understand that we cannot continue with what a lot of members of Congress are doing, and that is open borders. We have cities where you come into the country illegally, you go get into this city, you commit a very serious crime, a rape, an armed robbery, sell drugs, and the city won't participate in deporting that illegal immigrant and block the federal law officers from actually picking them up and deporting them after they've committed a second crime. So this is intellectually indefensible unless you are open borders in your mentality, unless you don't believe borders should be enforced at all. And overwhelmingly, Americans do not believe that. I think the whole world is becoming more sensitive to the need to protect and defend their borders.
I think it's also true to say, isn't it, that they're becoming more sensitive to the need to make sure that strategically important industries remain in the United States, that we're not dependent upon supplies of medicines entirely on a single country, that we need to make sure, I don't think in a too broad a way, I think we need to ensure that there should be, those industries we think are important should be given the assurance they can survive. We don't want to protect every chocolate cream manufacturer on strategic grounds. So is that going to change what has been a very strong pro-free trade movement in both the Republican Party and in the Senate and in the House?
Yes. I have used the phrase religious free traders. To some people, they just believe that trade is the highest ideal, that nothing can be done to inhibit trade, that a tariff, no matter what the provocation, is never justified, and that if they can make the product 2 pennies cheaper in some foreign country, we should buy it from that foreign country, regardless of what kind of impact it may have on American jobs, manufacturing, and that sort of thing. So we've had this discussion I'm more realistic about it. I think you do have to protect the national interest. For example, medicines. We were shocked, Americans were, to find out how dependent we were on China for our medicines. And one of the Chinese news organs said that if the United States doesn't quit criticizing us, we'll not send them medicines. And so that caused quite a stir. It was an eye-opening moment there. So I also think, even more importantly, John, is like Huawei. This is a huge deal. Huawei is a huge corporation. It is closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party government. There's no doubt about that. They now want to provide the 5G, the fifth generation high-speed internet. Our intelligence community, our military defense department believes that is very dangerous. Is not acceptable to the United States, that we cannot have the communist Chinese government supplying our most sensitive networks, and that it's simply a matter of national security. Australia stood firm. Australia says, no, we're not going to have them put this network into Australia. The Brits, you know the story there.
Yes.
And President not happy that it's still apparently on the table in the UK, and I support him on that. The president's rock solid that the Western democratic, lawful, abiding world should not be dependent on the Chinese communist totalitarians to run our internet systems. This is one of the big issues of our time. As Attorney General, I was on the National Security Council and was involved in these issues. I started a project called the China Initiative, and we're finding, what I found was that very little was being done about illegality, hacking, theft of trade secrets, and we've stepped that up, and I'm pleased to say it's just going really effectively, but sadly, we're finding more illegality than a lot of people imagined.
Let me try to nail something down. Are you saying, as you seem to be, that Britain's continued agreement to Huawei's participation in the 5G network in the UK is inconsistent with Britain's membership of the Five Eyes international communications deal with the United States, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, which has been a very important part of Britain's security?
It is, the Five Eyes is a most important thing. It's hard to overestimate how important it is. Yes, I mean, if one of the Five Eyes is subject to having their systems penetrated by an adversary, that adversary, then it's more difficult for us to share information with that country. It just is. We have this special relationship, the Five Eyes do, and we have almost total sharing of information that's to the benefit of all of us, but this could impact that. In fact, the president has suggested it, and I think the Secretary of State and others have talked about it in the United States. It's a big deal. And I would really urge the UK to not go down this road. Look, this is the deal with China. It's not unlike the Soviet Union, in my opinion, and the need for the Western world to have a coherent policy to confront it, to understand it, to act realistically, not to create war and not to be jingoistic, but to be serious about protecting the legitimate interest of a free constitutional order where things like truth are respected, not denigrated, where the highest ideal is not preserving the Communist Party, but trying to help do the right thing and to affirm the highest values of the people of our societies. I also believe that economically we need to remain unified. If China expects that within 10 years at current rates they could have the largest economy in the world, That's very realistic. There are a billion people. They're advancing in a lot of different ways. But if you combine the United States economy with the European economy, a Western civilization economy with Canada and Mexico and South America and other countries that share our basic values, then we dwarf China. We don't have to be intimidated about China. And we can buy products from countries that are less hostile to us. We can buy products we can make some at home. Now with the robots, labor is far less. We can buy products in the United States. We can buy them from Mexico. We can buy them from Europe. We can buy them from Turkey. We can buy them from South America, Central America, or Asia, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, the Philippines. Why do we have to buy all this from China? They got a head start. They got a supply lines. They develop certain technologies and shipping capabilities that takes some time for these other countries to develop, but they can. So on the scheme of things, it's my view and President Trump's view that China has more to lose by abusing world order and not being a good citizen than we do. So it may take a little while, but we can buy products from South Korea, sophisticated products, Japan, labor-intensive products from Vietnam, Mexico, and other places. China's the one that would lose this massive profits they've been making off the U.S. markets, where they have this massive trade surplus with the United States. This would hurt them a lot more than it's going to hurt us. President Trump knows leverage. He's a good negotiator. We've talked about that kind of issue during the campaign when I was with him. I know that's a fundamental way he sees the world. Now, we don't have to kowtow to China over this. They need us really more than we need them. And so we don't want to get into a massive trade war or highly intense negotiations and military options out there being excessively discussed. We want to have a realistic long-term relationship, like George Kennan, maybe the long telegram. It's time for us to create a bipartisan, Western world, Europe and the United States, to agree on a long-term policy of how to deal with this surging Chinese ideology that's out there, that's incompatible with our view of the world and what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false, individual liberty, individual freedom. And if we stick together, we'll prevail this time like we did last time.
Senator Sessions, I think that's a very strong and fruitful point at which to end our conversation. I'm grateful to you for providing the time and the conversation, and I look forward to seeing how your election goes in November. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.